What do you like? Tell me what you like.
There's value in that because it almost gives the brain like a vacation, right?
Holistic health is completely underappreciated, but so critical.
Eating whole foods, and
the key is just to find something that you really enjoy.
Welcome to the NAMP Nourishing You podcast. I'm Kristen Burkett.
And I'm Diana Wally. We're your hosts for NAMP's podcast dedicated to connecting holistic health enthusiasts with each other to share practical information from the holistic wellness space for enhanced vitality.
Diana and I are master nutrition therapists, board certified in holistic nutrition with private practices and an online joint venture that supports clients and practitioners as they strive to reach their full potential. We're honored to be hosting this podcast for NAMP and connecting our listeners with the latest in holistic wellness.
If you enjoyed today's show, help us out by commenting below, liking this video, and subscribing to the channel to help us spread the word.
This episode of the Nourishing You podcast is brought to you by NANP Gold sponsor, Beam Minerals, and Caroline Allen, the Mineral Geek. Caroline Allen is a health survivor and mineral enthusiast. On her own journey to health, Caroline found mineral replenishment to be a foundational element that is widely misunderstood. Her research into why minerals are important in human physiology and how they work in the body has taken her into a broad field of study, including microbiology, molecular biology, cellular biology, quantum physics, agricultural soil science, the study of plant decomposition, and glyphosate toxicity. As a result of her research, Caroline has become committed to helping people understand how and why mineral depletion affects the body, the systemic nature of glyphosate exposure, and specifically how plant-based humic and fulvic minerals can support healing and optimal health. Caroline is the co-founder and CEO of Beam Minerals, which provides plant-based humic and fulvic mineral supplements for people, pets, and plants. To learn more, visit beamminerals.com.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the Nourishing You podcast and a great conversation with Autumn Smith about why healthy meat matters. Autumn has dedicated her life to helping others harness the power of whole foods to live vibrant lives. In 2013, she and her husband Chaz launched Paleo Valley, a company dedicated to helping people get the essential nutrients they need without added sugars, grains, and other harmful ingredients. But they didn't stop there. After learning about the healing powers of grass-fed, pasture-raised meat, both for our bodies and the planet, Autumn and Chaz started their next venture. In 2018, they launched Wild Pastures, a regenerative meat delivery service that sends 100% grass-fed, pasture-raised meat directly to your doorstep. Autumn has a Master of Science in Holistic Nutrition, is a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, is a certified psychology coach by the Institute for Psychology of Eating, has received soil advocacy training by Kiss the Ground, is a fitness trainer, and a doctoral candidate. She is passionate about restoring regenerative agricultural practices, restoring healthy topsoil, and increasing the demand for sustainably and ethically sourced ingredients. Most importantly, she's passionate about educating as many others as possible through podcasts and collaborations. Welcome, Autumn. We're so excited to have you with us today.
Thank you so much, Kristen and Diana. I'm really excited to be here. I'm a big fan of your organization. I've even listened to your podcast before, so feeling great about being here.
Well, thank you. So as fellow nutritionists, of course, we love this topic, so we have a lot to cover. You know, Autumn, you started your business a decade ago, so I was thinking about it that you were really ahead of the curve in promoting regenerative agriculture. And, you know, we're definitely going to get into this more in detail later in the show. But for the listener, regenerative agriculture is basically farming in harmony with nature to restore and protect the soil. And why this is important is because modern farming can degrade the soil, which means that our produce contains fewer nutrients. And that may be related to the chronic illness in our country and the world, really. So this topic is really, really important for everyone out there. And so as a leader in this movement, Autumn, I'm super curious about your origin story and what propelled you into the holistic wellness space and to start your business.
Yes, we were. It literally started about 10 years ago, over 10 years ago for me. I was very sick when I was young. I had digestive issues from starting about 10, mental health issues once the digestive issues kind of went unaddressed because they just told me I had irritable bowel syndrome. There was not a lot I could do. They told me to take Beano and Gas-X, which I did, and it didn't fix it. And so my digestive issues coupled with mental health issues, because we know there's this gut brain connection. I didn't understand at the time. Anyway, I kind of spiraled and had a very challenging childhood. My poor parents, I got kicked out of my house before I even graduated high school. And luckily, I really loved dance and learning. And so I was still able to, live on my own, graduate high school, go to college, and eventually wound up in Los Angeles because I'm a dancer. And I knew if I was going to pursue dance, it had to be while I was young. And there I met Chaz, my husband. Now, my husband, though I had been living that way, just kind of managing through the day and suffering in silence for a very long time, and I put on a good show, he got close enough to me that he realized, wow, you're pretending. You're holding it together, but you are just surviving. Whereas, you have all this potential. So I want to help you. And I was working as a celebrity fitness trainer, so I was very fit. I had all the markings of like what you would traditionally think of as a person who was healthy. But I was, doubling over at night, and he'd find me on the bathroom floor, and I had anxiety and my skin was breaking out. And so we went to a few doctors in LA. They didn't really have answers for me. And so he got on the internet. Chaz is a kind of a bootstrapping type of guy. And he found, I think, Mark Sisson and Rob Wolf talking about paleo in, 2007-ish in a corner of the internet where no one else knew about it. And I thought he was crazy, but I loved him. And so we started going to farmers markets. I stopped consuming all of the juices, these like green machine juices and these carbohydrate bars and these power bars and all this soy milk and, kind of avoiding animal products like I thought I was supposed to do. And we started focusing on high quality animal products and vegetables and just whole foods. And in 30 days, my digestive issues went away and I could not believe it. And then over the course of the next year, I noticed other improvements in my mental health, in my, vitality, in my energy, in my emotional stability. And so I was working for Tracy Anderson and loved her company, but knew that it seemed like I had a different calling. I wanted to figure out how to make people well rather than just keeping them looking healthy, so I went back to school and quit my job and we just dove in and we started a process or like a food company, supplement and food company first, because I went on my last tour with J-Lo around the world and we visited 50 plus countries. I was in a different country every day. And even though I felt better, I couldn't maintain that diet. When I didn't have the tools, I didn't have clean products that I could take with me. So I realized, wow, there's a big demand for that. So I'm going to educate, but we're also going to go into food manufacturing, even though we had no experience. and here we are. And then the regenerative meat delivery service, we really got close to farmers and ranchers, these brilliant kind of scientific farmers and ranchers, and they taught us about the nuances in regenerative ag and how it was different from conventional and even organic agriculture. But they were telling us, we don't want to market ourselves. And it's really risky for us to make this transition because the larger system doesn't support it. And so if you can connect us to your people who care about this stuff, might be willing to pay a little bit more, then we feel like we could do our job too. And we could really build this thing. But otherwise they were kind of reticent and a little bit scared to do so. But because my husband has a marketing background, we decided to become their partners and try and transform the meat industry too. So that's how we got here. But my son, hearing the fact that there might be a day when his generation can't grow their own food, you've heard there's 60 harvests left. That's not necessarily accurate because it's such a nuanced topic, but just to know that our topsoil is undoubtedly dwindling, and then that topsoil absolutely sustains life on Earth. And if we lose that, as we are with our conventional agricultural practices, then we're in for a very rude awakening. So we wanted to be a part of, letting our children inherit a planet that they deserve.
Wow. True entrepreneurs, number one. Uh, Fabulous story. And, I always love a good ending to a story. And that is the case for you. And, thank you for caring enough, right? Like, I
Oh,
think
yeah.
there's a lot of people out there, even, myself included, we talk about how important this is, but you're really doing something about it. And that, it takes people like you to make a change and make that commitment. So thank you. And thank you for putting yourself out there for all of us and for our kids, because we need you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. So I find this topic interesting for lots of reasons. But one I just want to go into a little bit before we get into more details is the whole concept of meat in our society is turned into such a controversial topic for so many reasons. A lot of plant-based movements, a lot of different theories on, whether meat is good or bad, if it's evil or not. Why do you think so many Americans are afraid of meat? And why is this potentially a problem?
Oh, such a good question. And there's so many fascinating historical elements to the story. Have you ever discussed Dr. Gary Fettke or Belinda Fettke's work on this podcast?
No.
Okay, so Dr. Gary Fettke, he's an orthopedic surgeon down in Tasmania. So I'm creating a docuseries called Rethink Meat. We just finished the 3rd episode. There will be 7. And so these are things I've learned along the way. But he was performing amputations for his diabetic patients and growing sad, obviously, about it. At the same time, he was himself using a lower carb diet and seeing, wow, I feel better. Things are changing. And so he recommended that his diabetic patients avoid sugar. Now, the dietitian on staff hated this, turned him into the medical board, and he suffered 4 years of litigation for the recommendation to avoid sugar. And he was the first medical doctor ever silenced from talking about nutrition. So his wife, Belinda Fettke, as he underwent these, lengthy proceedings where he was presenting valid science till he's blue in the face, she realized it doesn't seem to be penetrating. It doesn't seem to matter if the science is there. So there's something else underneath it. And she looked into the influences of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So Ellen G. White is a prophetess of the Adventist Church, and she believed that a clean diet did not include meat or very little meat. She's very influential. One of her students was Dr. John Harvey Kellogg, and he started the processed food industry, flaked corn and wheat, because they believed that meat created sinful desires, and it was essentially a way to prevent masturbation in children. He also created the first meat alternative, and you'd think that the Adventist Church couldn't possibly be that influential today, but their members sit on our dietary guidelines committees. One of their members, Lena Cooper, founded the American Dietetics Association, and they have hundreds of hospitals. They're very, very, very influential in ways that we don't even really understand. So religion is one influence. The second is entrepreneurship. William Procter and James Gamble, around the beginning of the 20th century, they had all this cottonseed oil. And candles and soap sales were dwindling. And so they figured out that we need to do something with this. It's essentially an industry waste product. So they found out if they used a product like hydrogenation, which was this new technology where you could make a liquid fat into a solid fat, it looked like lard. And they thought, well, this is great. We'll just sell it to Americans. We'll launch this massive marketing campaign and call it the cleaner and more healthful animal fat. And that was it. There was no substantiation of its health benefits or health detriments prior to this massive marketing campaign. And they did. They absolutely captured the American public. And, like back in the 1900s, we had almost all of our fats were from animal fats. And today, about 86% of our fats are from vegetable oils. And Crisco in its original form was 50% trans fat, which we know led to hundreds of thousands of deaths due to heart disease. So there's that. There was a fictional novel called The Jungle, which was written about the meat packing industry and the conditions that really annihilated meat sales for many years. We had sugar industry executives. There's papers come out recently found that they kind of nudged and paid for some research that would demonize saturated fat to take the blame off of sugar cancer and its link with heart disease. We also have environmental activists. We have processed food companies who can create plant-based foods and meat alternatives, because that is a huge market. And so we have all of these narratives. We have this misinformed environmental narrative, right? That all animal agriculture is destructive. And so all of these influences kind of converge to create what appears to be this mainstream narrative that meat is really dangerous and animal fats are something to be avoided, where it's actually couldn't be further from the truth. I mean, we've been eating meat since, for millions of years. Certain archaeologists believe it was the reason that we've developed such large brains. It has high levels of bioavailable nutrients. If you look at Dr. Ty Beal's work, he actually created this paper called Priority Micronutrient Density. And he found that when you take into consideration the nutrients most of us are deficient in, it's animal products. 9 of the 10 top foods are animal products. Only leafy greens made the other one. Then we have really high quality sources of complete protein. So protein can turn off appetite. Protein can improve our body composition. Protein creates our structural bodies and our signaling molecules. And so because 2 out of 3 of us are overweight or obese, and when we eat carbohydrate or fat-rich snacks, we don't satiate, we don't become as satiated. We could use higher quality protein as the metabolic tool that it could be, and we could correct micronutrient deficiency, which is actually far more prevalent in even developed countries than we think. Ty Beal's research showed 1 out of 3 women of reproductive age has at least one micronutrient deficiency, and they were only looking at about 6 nutrients. So imagine if you were looking at every nutrient. And so the danger here is these animal products were critical to our evolution. They contain highly bioavailable nutrients, some that we can't get anywhere else: vitamin B12, heme iron, carnitine, DHA, many nutrients that we really require from animal products. And high quality protein is satiating and improves metabolic outcomes. And so this narrative is destructive in many ways. And I sincerely believe it's one of the main reasons that so many people are confused about how to actually be healthy today.
Wow, that's a lot. And yes. It's just amazing to go back and historically and see how things develop. And I think, a lot of people will say, oh, that's all conspiracy theory, to think, that different industries or different people in industries have, put us on a different path for different types of foods or products. But when you really peel it back and you look at who's been behind different food movements, and you track how the money tracks too, along with these different industries, you see where a lot of this comes from. And it's not conspiracy theory. It's capitalism. It's how, it's how the money moves in our society. And it's a lot of responsibility for where we are today in some of this. Can you speak to any of the differences, like in terms of benefits of meat versus, like when we're talking meat, are we just talking red meat? Are we talking chicken and fish? Or can you kind of just carve out the bigger picture there of what we're referring to?
Yeah, I'm talking about just animal products in general. I do think red meat has some really great attributes. Highly bioavailable iron and zinc, for example. I think that is one reason that can be very, very important, especially for youngsters, right? Who iron issues or iron related issues can stunt development and proper growth. And so I think that red meat is definitely important. Some people do better with it than others. Saturated fat is not the nutrient of concern that we thought it was, but that doesn't mean there's some people who might respond deleteriously for various reasons. But also, right, chicken and turkey, highly bioavailable protein, generally a little bit leaner if that's something you're looking for. I'm not particularly concerned about animal fats, especially when they're fed properly, but for some people that could be a concern. Of course, eggs and dairy, very, very beneficial, especially eggs. I think if you don't have autoimmune conditions, of course, certain populations are going to have to restrict certain animal products, and dairy for those who are tolerant. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful food. Actually, that is one of the things I would do differently with my son. In the beginning, I kind of had him on a paleo template, and I found through even genetic testing that he does very, very well with dairy, as does my husband. I don't do so much, so I would have done a little bit more of that. And of course, high quality wild caught fish, absolutely critical. I think I read a study the other day, it was out of Harvard, that between 74, I think, and up to 90,000 deaths each year are due to omega-3 fatty acid deficiency. And of course, high quality fish is a very great source of that, but also grass-fed meat. And we can get into this. There's a paper out of the UK showing that grass-fed meat can be a replacement, can be a contributor, a significant contributor to your omega-3 intake when it is fed with, grass and on diverse forages and things like that. So yeah, I mean, I think meat, I think dairy, I think eggs, I think they can all be very valuable tools depending on who the eater is.
We definitely want to circle back to the quality of the meat and how it's raised for sure. So let's put a pin in that. So talking about protein, how would someone go about a vegan diet? Is that possible? All of the things that you have said about the benefits of meat and animal protein, and Kristen and I are completely on board with that. But what about somebody who is choosing a vegan diet? What health issues could they be up against? Like, what strategies could they use to try to be healthy with that? Is that even possible?
Ooh, such a good question. So, I'm doing episode 4 is all about, is the vegan diet, the best in terms of its nutritional value, right? I understand there are other reasons people want to be a vegan, but I think when it comes to health, it's just going to make things more difficult. Now, there are people who can thrive on a vegan diet. I've seen them. They're my friends. I have one fitness trainer, and she seems to have been doing it for a number of years. But I think she's more of the exception, because you're not going to get vitamin B12 in plant sources alone. And I know there are B12 analogs in certain plant foods, but I've heard that it actually interferes with the absorption of vitamin B12. And vitamin B12 is really, really critical for our brain and for the health of our nervous system. And so and even the way that our body regulates and uses iron. And so if you can't get adequate B12, there are a number of cognitive deficits and even neurological and psychiatric manifestations that can be the result. I've seen case studies where people come into the hospital as lifelong vegetarians, and one woman in particular had depression and then eventually psychosis and catatonia, and they had all the traditional therapies on board and nothing changed until she got vitamin B12 injections. So there's that. There's cases of children not receiving adequate B12 within a critical window of development and never regaining that development. They miss that developmental window forever. And, iron in its animal form is a lot more absorbable than in the plant-based form. And plants contain anti-nutrients, right? So we know there are limitations. There's just certain nutrients that aren't even available when you don't eat animals. And then there are limited bioavailability in other nutrients, meaning it's very hard. But then when it comes to protein, if you really, really want to do it, you're just going to have to eat more protein. Some people have even suggested for vegetarians and vegans that you just have a higher recommendation or recommended daily amount of protein. So you're going to combine your legumes. There's various ways that you can combine foods. So you have corn and rice, for example, that can create a more balanced amino acid profile, because that's what we're eating for. We're eating for amino acids, not just protein, even though we often see protein on the label. There are certain, soy protein, pea protein. These are higher bioavailability, higher quality plant-based substitutes. But I don't think that you will ever be as healthy. I don't for the majority of people. There are certain nutrients that you need to convert, right? From ALA, for example, which is our omega-3 fatty acid. ALA needs to be converted into DHA and EPA, and those are the forms that our brain and body really, really need. That conversion can be limited for some people, even genetically. That conversion can be limited by our health status, our thyroid status, our gut status. And so I think we're just kind of playing with fire when we choose a vegan diet, and that it's your choice, but especially when it comes to children. I have such a heart for children. I think there's this perception, there's this halo effect around vegan diets for kids. And I had a friend come home the other day saying her daughter was not allowed in a club at her school because she ate meat. And it's the young kids that I really, really worry about, because like I said, there are critical windows of development. And if you miss those windows, that child will never fully recover. There have unfortunately been deaths. And there's this really cool Finnish study where they looked at dietitian prescribed diets for children that included supplementation. And even in that circumstance, which never occurs almost, right? You never have that much attention paid. Those kids were still deficient in certain nutrients, in amino acids and other vitamins. And it looked as though, at least in this trial, that the cholesterol production in those kids wasn't compensated for like it was in adults. And so I just think it's okay if you want to be a vegan, knowing that it will be more challenging to get all of your nutrients and to get all of your protein, and maybe to reach your fullest health potential. But I do think for children that I just don't think it's the right diet.
So just to kind of close the loop on that and bring it down to like the everyday going to the grocery store, making choices. When you see there's so many new plant-based meats options in the grocery store. What do you say to people who are trying to fill that void for protein and amino acids by purchasing something that says it's a plant-based meat?
I'd say that's not the way to go. I would say plant-based meats are highly processed meats. They're most times the product of monoculture, pesticide-laden agriculture. Many times they're not organic, and they're not the same. Their nutrition labels might look the same in those, 12 nutrients, but they're not going to be the same in terms of bioavailability. Some of those companies have actually been sued for misrepresenting the amount of protein that's in their product, because of course it's going to be limited. And then what are the other additives? So if you want to replace animal products, I would do it with more whole foods. I would do it with beans. I would do it with legumes. I would do it with, organic corn. I would do it with your grains. I would do it with edamame, maybe even high quality soy, fermented soy, something like that. But I would absolutely not use processed meat alternatives.
All right.
Well, I feel like we've made a really good case for why animal protein is important for your health. Let's circle back as we promised to talk about the quality of the meat that we eat. So can you explain why the way an animal is raised would impact the quality of the meat? And our listeners may have heard of CAFO meat. That's a term that's thrown around, now. So what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so there's CAFOs, factory farms, feedlots. They're where 90% of the animal products you're going to see in the grocery store are coming from today. And so obviously we have the inhumane treatment of animals. I don't like the fact that they're just given a ration of corn and soy many times, whereas Dr. Fred Provenza's research has shown that animals will self-medicate, right? And they know what their bodies need. And when they're given choices, they were able to stay healthy. And so sometimes many of these animals who are getting sick are maybe just reacting negatively to the feed that isn't necessarily right for their body. Also, their feed will change the nutritional profile of the final product. So when they're fed grass, cows, for example, you're going to have higher levels of omega-3. You're going to have higher levels of antioxidants like glutathione. You're going to have higher levels of conjugated linoleic acid, higher levels of vitamin A and E, and on and on. The second problem is there's, a lot of additives being used in factory farmed meat. You can have ractopamine, which is a beta agonist. It's been banned in 160 countries, and yet it's used here in America. It's been linked to things like pounding sensations in your heart and poisonings. And there was a Consumer Reports showed that 1 out of 5 pork products in America had residues of ractopamine. You also have hormones that are used as growth promotants. And the European Union, for example, has banned meat being imported treated with these hormones. But in America, there are still 6 hormones in use, one of which is zeranol, which is an estrogen that's been linked to reproductive issues in animals. And a paper maybe linked it to precocious puberty in Puerto Rico. And then we have antibiotic residues, right? So antibiotic resistance is a looming threat, and 70% of the antibiotics we are making are used in animal agriculture. And so if we continue to use antibiotics in that way, we will potentially see a day where our life-saving antibiotics don't work anymore. And so for me, it's what you're getting. You're getting different nutrients, higher levels of certain nutrients that we know are very important for human health, but it's just as much about what you're not getting. You're not going to have antibiotic residues, potentially hormones or beta agonist residues like ractopamine in your meat, pesticides. So you're getting a cleaner planet. That's for the human health consideration. There are also environmental considerations as well, but I think more nutrients and fewer potential toxins is just how I would sum it up.
I think I'll skip the ractopamine in my pork.
Yeah.
No, thank you.
I mean, I know. And pork, conventional pork has a very off-kilter omega-6 to omega-3 fatty acid ratio. So for anyone who doesn't know what that means, it's a ratio of omega fatty acids that some people believe is really important for inflammation regulation. So you don't want to see a lot of omega-6s and very few omega-3s, but in conventional pork, it's something like 35 omega-6s to 1 omega-3. You want to see more of a 1-to-1 balance. And so you can balance that when you feed a pig grass. Even if you put a grain-fed pig on grass and just also let them eat grass, you can get to like a 15-to-1. You can significantly improve this ratio. But when we have pigs in factory farms just being fed things like grain, that leads to a very different fatty acid profile.
So how did we get here? Like, how did this come about? What changed in terms of who's producing meat, who isn't? What's driving the difference? Because cows used to graze on grass, a long time ago before the factory farms came into play. So what changed in our society?
Yeah, I think the priorities in the system, and I'm a Montana girl and I love farmers and ranchers, right? So I don't think it wasn't their decision. Like, people saw this booming population. We got scared. We had advancements like antibiotics, so animals didn't have to live in sanitary conditions, and they could grow faster on less food. Then we have supplements like vitamin A and vitamin D, so they didn't have to be outside anymore. We had increased refrigeration, and we began to prioritize efficiency. How can we make the most meat in the smallest space with the least amount of money, rather than looking at the bigger picture and also prioritizing our ecology? And so we all of a sudden saw huge corporations coming in, setting up these massive factory feedlots that were very efficient when you're looking at just cost alone and ignoring the externalities. But now what we start to understand is there's a number of unintended consequences, or what they call externalities, that you don't necessarily pay for at checkout, but that you pay for in environmental pollution, in the degradation of the health of the product, in animal welfare, in the dissolution of our rural communities, the social impact too. Many of us, I grew up in a rural community. Those are disappearing right now. And fewer people are actually involved in food production. When we began our country, almost 1 out of every 2 people were involved in food production. And now it's like something like 2%. And so we've become, as these systems have become centralized and consolidated, really, really vulnerable, in addition to creating what I believe is an unaffordable product when you actually consider the environmental ramifications, the ramifications of animal welfare, the potentially degraded product, and the fact that huge corporations are owning a lot of our meat production today, which makes us very, very vulnerable.
Yeah, and then you put the health consequences on top of it. And if you start to add in the costs of that, we may be paying, there may be cheap meat available, but it is not cheap in the long run in terms of the costs all the way across the board.
Exactly. Yeah. It's unaffordable when we take everything into consideration.
Right. So you touched on a little bit about the impact on the environment. Can you talk a little bit more about the difference between raising meat on grass farms versus the feedlots?
Yeah. Have you guys talked about Alan Savory's work at all?
Nope. This is a new topic for us. So you go.
I'm so excited. He really, really inspired me. So he was a rangeland ecologist, and he grew up in Africa, and he learned that cows and livestock were destroying the ecosystem. And so he and several of his colleagues decided, we're going to go ahead and kill 40,000 elephants in an attempt to make the land better. And they did. And what he found was the land got worse. It didn't get better. And he calls it the biggest blunder of his whole career. You can check out his TED Talk. It has over 10 million views. It's a really beautiful story. But what he learned from that was, it is not necessarily the animal. It's the management of that animal. It's the human intervention, because back when animals were doing their natural predatory prey cycles, they were in an area, they were stimulating grass growth. That grass can take carbon out of the air and suck it underground. They were creating divots in the soil, which is helping water to kind of pool. They're helping seeds to germinate. Their manure and their urine are actually fertilizers for the soil. And then they would move on from that area because they'd have predators, or because they would naturally move on. So that is a very, very healthy system. And that was able to actually improve the fertility of the land. And it can do so today when we allow it to work that way. But what hasn't worked for us is this factory feedlot system where we put a huge thousands of animals in one area and create these massive amounts of manure. It's been estimated that livestock create 3 to 20 times the amount of manure as the people in the United States. And when it's consolidated in that area, it's overwhelming for the land, and it becomes a source of pollution and toxicity. And then we couple that with, like I said, it can be, E. coli can breed in these animal feeding operations. We can have more infections and potentially novel pathogens because there have so many hosts in such a small space. And the conditions aren't extremely sanitary. And so they just pass through these animals and mutate. Then you end up with things like H5N1, which was a bird flu coming out of China that killed 60% of those who were infected. And just to compare that, COVID killed between 1% and 3%. And then, you have pesticides, which are often being used in huge amounts to raise the corn and soy that is often fed to animals in feedlots. And those two systems are often separate. So you have this monoculture over here with being doused with pesticides and then being transported to the feedlots, and of course, these pesticides are, they can pollute our waterways. They can kill animals. They can kill endangered species. They have been linked to cancers. We know there is many lawsuits and several of them that have been won for people using glyphosate occupationally. And it's tied to lymphoma and cancer. And so, animals are not inherently destructive, but they are destructive in the systems that we've created today. But fortunately, if we go back to the way that animals were raised before, think more like Ronald McDonald or Old MacDonald Farm, it's diversified. There are cows, there are crops, there are pigs, there are chickens, and they all kind of work together in a balanced way that improves the cycles of nature, works with the cycles of nature. It's only when we break that cycle of nature and kind of work against it and try to have just one thing on a huge plot of land or just one type of animal and, in a huge factory farm. That's when we're breaking the cycles of nature. That's when we are bound to experience the negative impacts of animal agriculture. But it doesn't have to be that way.
Thankfully. Yeah.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yes. And we have so many people doing it the right way in America. There's so many people. It's just a huge area these days.
This is probably a loaded question, and I hadn't planned on asking it, but if, as a country, if we went back to regenerative agriculture and raising our animals in the way that you're describing, would we be able to feed our population? Do you think that's possible?
Yeah, you know what? And this is a question for someone much smarter than myself or much more immersed in that, but I have spoken to those people. And first, they'll say, it's not about that. It's about the fact that our current system is unsustainable. And that if we think we're going to feed our population continuing with this system and feed them with a healthful product and, not destroy our environment, that is not possible. But also, if we use land very creatively, so we use public lands, we let people lease land. Like we have a group out here in Boulder that goes on public lands and leases that land and uses their animals to graze on that land. I think there's a lot of creative ways that we can actually do it. Diana Rogers, in her book, Sacred Cow, kind of set out a system that would allow us to graze as many animals that we wouldn't really have to change. And so I do think it's possible. It's going to we're going to have to think outside the box. We're going to all have to work together. Maybe our meat intake might have to change a little bit. Maybe we should all have a little bit more of our hands in food production in general. Maybe we can have more gardens, but I do think it's absolutely possible. I think it's not only possible, I think it's a really important thing that we need to do, not overnight necessarily, but just for the long term. We're not going to sustain what we're doing now.
Yeah, definitely. This is all such great information. I want to spend the remaining part of our time with some tips to be meat savvy when purchasing for our listeners, because I think this could be really helpful. There's so much terminology out there with some tricky labels, and people think they're doing the right thing, but maybe not putting their money in the place where they think they are. So can you go through some of those common terms and help give us some definitions and what to look for and what to avoid.
Yeah. So first one is natural. Unfortunately, I go to stores and I look, and natural is everywhere on the meat products, and it doesn't mean anything. It means they did not add artificial colors and flavors, but that is really all that it means. It doesn't tell you anything about how that animal was raised or whether they received antibiotics or hormones or anything. So natural isn't a term that you can trust very much. And then we have hormone free. And pork and poultry have to be hormone free. It's not even, so if you're seeing that on a pork or a poultry product, that isn't going to tell you much. It's going to distract you from bigger questions. Again, what are they eating? How were they raised? What are the conditions? And another one would be grass-fed. Unfortunately, grass-fed is not a highly regulated term ever since 2016. They stopped regulating it. And all animals, all cows are grass-fed for the first 2/3 of their lives. But then it's what happens at the end of their life that can dictate ultimately the nutritional value of the product. Now, they can have grain and things like that. And so 100% grass-fed, if that's something you value, the way that it's finished is a safer bet. Or you could do something like the American Grass-Fed Association, AGA certification is going to tell you much more about that. They have a very stringent program where they actually check on things rather than having, people sign off on an affidavit, which also often happens, but is obviously less precise. And then we have, cage-free and free range. These are some of my least favorite because you would think that this meant the animals are roaming out on pasture, and it doesn't. Cage-free animals raised for meat aren't even in cages. They're often in coops. And so it could still mean there's thousands of them in a little warehouse together. And then free range doesn't mean they're raised on pasture necessarily. It just means they have access to the outside. And that access can just be to a dirt plot. And so you want to look for pasture raised if possible. Also organic. I think this is, when it comes to animal products, organic doesn't always mean that it's out on pasture either, right? You can feed organic grains, and sometimes organic operations look more like a feedlot where they're consuming organic grains than necessarily having them out on pasture. And a final note is, none of these terms are really going to tell you that a meat is regeneratively raised. This is a very, new marketing interest for consumers. And so you will see some of them making the claim, but you'll want to kind of inquire about that and see how that's being measured and analyzed, because truly regenerative products, you'll have ecological outcomes measured and verified. Regenerative means taking something, a plot of land, from one state to a higher or more worthy state. And that needs to be an objective thing, right? You want to make sure that things are changing, biodiversity is improving, water holding capacity is improving, soil organic matter is being built. And so, you kind of really have to know the farmer for that one. But when I look for beef and it's outside our companies, I'm looking for 100% grass-fed beef. When I look for eggs or chicken, I'm looking for, and pork, actually, pastured chicken, eggs, and pork. And you can get, I think I do organic, Vital Farms, actually. They have a regenerative egg, I believe now, like eggs.
I've seen those.
Yeah, in certain locations. I've definitely seen them in California, less so in Colorado, but I know that it's available. And so, and when it comes to dairy, if you're in California, Organic Pastures, they have wonderful dairy that I used to consume when I lived there. But those are kind of my rules. We also have a meat delivery service, obviously, that is exclusively regeneratively raised meat. But again, if you're just going to a grocery store, that's going to be a lot harder to identify.
Good. Well,
Now
thank you. It makes me laugh because we have this thing in my house. Every time I'm serving something new that my husband doesn't recognize, he just looks at me and says, "Is it grass-fed, free range, cage-free?" Like
sprinkled
the whole list.
my husband will add, "Is it sprinkled with fairy dust?"
I know. Luckily, my husband's more passionate about it as I am, so I don't. But I get it. I bet.
Yeah.
You could see it if you weren't. Yeah, absolutely.
As long as one of us knows, right? It's the quality that we're looking for. It's all good.
Yeah. So Autumn, what would you say to the listener who's thinking, gosh, I really want to eat this way. Autumn has convinced me this is important, but it just seems really expensive. What would you say to that listener?
Well, I'd say that's exactly why we created our second company. So Wild Pastures that was our mission, because I kept telling people, oh yeah, regenerative ag, support these farmers. And they're like, well, we just can't afford it and we can't find them. And so, like I said at the beginning, we partnered with them. But the second element to our company that's very unique is it's 40% less than other meat delivery services. And it's the only meat delivery service that I know of that is American and regenerative exclusively. So I would say check out Wild Pastures. We are a national company, and we are, shipping everywhere in the United States. And like I said, only from America, only from regenerative farmers, and you can totally customize your box. We're using recyclable packaging and compostable materials, upcycled compostable materials, and electric vehicles where we can, local deliveries where we can. We're using the entire animal. Our company is really devoted to keeping things accessible for everyone, no matter where you're living, but also to not wasting anything. So if that's something that interests you, check out Wild Pastures.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I know, like, if somebody can't do that, even looking for a local rancher that is raising their meat, in this way that we're talking about, 100% grass fed. And when you do the math, I think sometimes people just get scared off by it and they don't really sit down and kind of do the math. But when you purchase this way, oftentimes when you look at the price per pound over it, it's so much less than actually just conventional meat at the grocery store. It just doesn't seem like it, when you're looking at buying something in bulk because you haven't broken it down. But it doesn't have to be that much more expensive. And as you said earlier, maybe you don't have to eat 8 ounces of a steak at a time. Maybe you're splitting that with someone at a higher quality, and you're still getting the nutrients that you need and plenty of protein, but you're getting all of those health benefits from it as well. So I think there's lots of ways to go about it, but to really dig in and look at it from a budget standpoint might actually convince you that it's not that much more expensive.
No, that's two amazing points. Is that I think when we averaged it out, it was something around $9 a pound. Whereas if you go to Whole Foods and get a pound of grass-fed beef, it's going to be what, 11, 12? It depends on where you're at. But yeah, it isn't that much more expensive. And you get pork, and you can have fish, and we have beef bacon, and we have, just all of the different products. And the other cool thing that Dr. Provenza studied, and that I notice, is when you have phytonutrients, it's something I didn't even touch on, but we see when animals are fed grass and diverse forages specifically, that the level of plant-based nutrients, phytonutrients, terpenoids, phenols, carotenoids, these are significantly higher. And he believes, or one of his hypotheses is that creates that satiating effect that you get in pastured meat that you don't necessarily get in other types of meat. So I've noticed that my family and I, the three of us share like a little steak, and we feel great afterwards. Like, it doesn't take as much because it is a little bit more nutrient dense, and even maybe it is significantly more nutrient dense when it comes to the phytonutrient compounds that the Fred Provenza studied that shut off the appetite of animals who consume them.
Oh, interesting.
So, that's really cool.
Yeah,
that's really cool. Well, I know we're coming up on time. We just have you for another minute here, but let's give our listeners one last thing to chew on. Did you see what I did there? So, Kristen, we talked about this before we jumped on, that we both love your beef sticks, and you use them at, take them as snacks or whatever. Like my husband and I love to backpack, and they're a staple for us. Tell the listeners why your beef sticks are different than, another jerky that you might find at a local supermarket.
Okay, first, taste. So they're very different. It's not like a jerky that's going to tire out your jaw. It's got a snap to it. It's more like one of those hickory smoked summer sausages that you're going to find. And that taste, it's absolutely delicious, is a result of the fermentation that we use, rather than the citric acid encapsulation, which is the traditionally used process of preserving meat, which involves genetically modified corn and hydrogenated oils. They're like created these little beads, and then they are put into the product and then melt into the product. And you don't often have to label it. It just says, say, citric acid. Now, we use fermentation because it is an age-old process our ancestors have been using that also sometimes results in the production of probiotics. And just fermentation leads to a more natural, less preservative-heavy shelf stability. And so we really like it for that. The second reason is we use regeneratively raised meat from American family farms exclusively. And then the third thing is we don't have additives. We don't have MSG. We don't have wheat. We don't have BHA and BHT, things that have been linked to, they are potentially carcinogenic, and just this litany of other additives, random additives, sugar even, that are often found in most meat sticks. It's just a clean organic spices and beef or pork and turkey. We have chicken coming, we have venison coming, and we have a salmon stick coming. So lots of flavors, even in the beef department. Teriyaki is a great one for children. Summer sausage is nice and mild. And so we just have the quality, American family farms, no citric acid, encapsulated citric acid, and no weird preservatives.
I can't wait for the salmon. I love salmon.
Yeah, we're excited about that one. It's been a trickier product, of course, but it's coming and it's really good.
Nice. Well, it's been so much fun learning from you today. Knowing where our food is coming from is so important, and it shouldn't be taken for granted. So I think this matters more now than it ever has. And so thank you for sharing some of that information with our listeners. And I think all of us are more knowledgeable now about why and what to look for. So that's fantastic.
Well, I'm absolutely honored to have been a guest, and thank you for letting me be here and for being cheerleaders. I really appreciate your support.
Thank you so much, Autumn, and thank you to everybody who's listening. Until next time, take care. We can't wait to see you soon.
If you'd like to access other episodes or subscribe so you don't miss a beat, you can find us at nanp.org/NANP-podcast.
Membership in the NANP provides you with a competitive advantage. Whether you're a current practitioner or a student, we want you to become an active, informed leader of the holistic nutrition community and join today at nanp.org. NANP is very proud to provide the highest level of professional recognition and validation in the holistic nutrition industry through the board certification in holistic nutrition credential. To earn this valuable designation, candidates must demonstrate an exceptional level of knowledge and understanding of holistic nutrition by passing a board exam and documenting client contact hours. Are you ready to boost your credibility with board certification? Visit nanp.org today to apply.
Keep in mind that the information on the NANP podcast is for educational purposes only and should not be considered medical or legal advice. The NANP is not liable or responsible for any harm, damage, or illness arising from the use of the information contained herein. By listening to the information on this podcast, you agree to defend, indemnify, and hold harmless the NANP and all agents. Copyright NANP, all rights reserved.